Hi there, this video is our first video on our new unit of work on human well-being. So we're going to get the ball rolling by introducing you to what that term means and making sure that we can explain why it's so important in geography and basically what we're going to be doing for the next few weeks. So our lesson today is titled Human Well-being, and what we're trying to look at and learn is to understand what we mean by that term well-being. So by the end of the video, what I'm hoping you to do is to be able to explain what well-being is, explain what indicators are, explain how we use those indicators in geography, and then explain why well-being is so important in geography. So let's take a look at our first sort of goal. What is meant by that term well-being? We've heard it a lot, particularly at school, but well-being is a really important aspect, particularly in geography. Well-being is basically how people feel in terms of life. Do people have a good sense of life in countries, in cities, in rural areas? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about how good life is, and we can develop people's countries, develop people's lives through a number of different things: education, health services, money, all these type of things that we look at. So well-being is basically how developed, or to do with the development of people and how people perceive their life to be. If we look in terms of the world at the moment, we have natural disasters, we have war, and we look at well-being with these factors affecting well-being. So how do we measure well-being? Well, there's two ways we can do it. We've got quantitative indicators, and they're physical things. Now I've put a picture of a dollar sign there because that's one indicator: how much a country earns, gross domestic product, or GDP. We also have how much a country earns in terms of buying and selling as well within a country, and that's gross national product. So when we talk about indicators, that's what we mean. Now, gross national product, gross domestic product, is a value in American dollars, and we use American dollars because that's the global trading currency to see how rich a country is. The higher the GMP, the more developed, the richer the country is, and the higher the well-being is meant to be based on that figure. Now, when we have that figure, it might be $25,000. That's per person. So it's saying the gross domestic product of a country is $25,000 per person. So that's what a quantitative indicator is actual physical number. There are some issues about that, like how even is wealth spread in the country, and that's why we use a mixture of quantitative and our next indicator, qualitative indicators, because it can be things as happiness, years of education, these type of things, access to healthcare, how many mobile phones people have, access to the internet. So when we measure development and well-being, we look at indicators, and they can be separated into two: quantitative and qualitative. The qualitative is it's very hard to measure because it's based on people's opinions, whereas quantitative you can actually measure. It's an actual number. So there's the difference between the two. So when we look at well-being, we look at both of them. How do we use indicators in geography? Well, what we like doing is seeing where all the developed countries are, and developing countries are too. They're called spatial patterns, and this indicates what we mean by that. So in geography, what we do, we can categorize the world into two: rich and poor. On this map, it's a very simplistic map of development. The areas are in blue. You've probably guessed it, are developed countries where well-being is probably pretty high. The countries in red are less developed countries, and see that well-being isn't as good. This is simplistic because this is called the north-south divide, or the Brandit line. This started in geography in the 1960s and 1970s, The reason why it's called a north and south divide, if we drew a line between the red and the blue in the north, you'd see that much of the blue is in the north, and then at the bottom much of red is in the south. The exceptions are obviously Australia and New Zealand, and there's some other little countries if you look closely as well. But when we talk about spatial patterns development, that's how we categorise, and that's how we use development in geography. Why is this important? Because we can see where countries need help, we can manage that development. But remember, when I said about development indicators, qualitative indicators, when we talk about happiness, that type of thing, aren't as evenly, sort of defined like we can see here. And remember, there are some issues like, not everyone in China is poor, not everyone in India is poor, not everyone in Australia is rich, and so on. So it does sort of like hide the fact of the true truth of development in countries. Okay, that's our first video done about well-being. I hope it sort of helps you understand some of the basics, and we're going to look at development or well-being in more detail. Okay, thanks.